"You don't need your own bathroom," my mother said, standing in the doorway of my bedroom like she was announcing the weather. "Your cousin needs privacy. She's going through something." I set down my book. I looked at her. I said, "Okay." She blinked. She had clearly been prepared for an argument. She had her hands clasped in front of her, the way she does when she's bracing for impact. But I just said okay, and I went back to my book, and she stood there for another 3 seconds before she turned and left. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday, I was gone. Let me back up, because the bathroom wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment I finally understood what I was dealing with. I'm 31 years old. I have a decent job. I'm a remote paralegal for a mid-sized firm downtown, which means I work from home, which means I have very specific needs when it comes to my living situation. I need quiet. I need a reliable internet connection. I need a space that functions like a professional environment for at least 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, because I'm on video calls with attorneys and clients and sometimes federal court clerks who do not want to hear television in the background. I had moved back into my childhood home 2 years earlier after a bad breakup and a lease that ended at the worst possible time. My parents had offered. I had accepted. It felt like a temporary landing pad. I paid reduced rent, $600 a month, well below market, but I also paid the cable and internet bill, which ran about $240. I handled the family's tax filing every spring. I managed my father's prescription refills because he refuses to use the pharmacy app and my mother doesn't trust computers. I drove my younger brother to his Saturday tutoring sessions for 4 months until he got his license. I fixed the gutters by hiring someone and paying out of pocket because my father has a bad knee and my mother would have just let them overflow until the basement flooded. I'm not saying any of that to sound saintly. I'm saying it because context matters, and I want you to understand what the word family meant in that house. It meant I was useful. My cousin, I'll call her my cousin, is 22. She'd been living in another city with a guy who turned out to be, in the gentlest possible terms, not great for her. When things fell apart, my parents invited her to stay with us, which was fine. I don't have a problem with that. She needed support. Family supports each other. She arrived on a Sunday with 4 suitcases, a small dog my mother had already agreed to without telling my father, and an energy that I can only describe as performatively fragile. She cried at dinner. She cried watching TV. She cried when we ran out of her specific brand of oat milk. My mother moved around her like she was made of blown glass, narrating her emotions back to her in a soft voice. My father watched football and pretended the dog wasn't eating his socks. I was empathetic. Genuinely. I've been through hard breakups. I know what it's like to feel like the floor has dropped out. I gave her space. I was warm. I asked how she was doing and meant it. But then week 3 happened. She was in my bathroom when I needed to get ready for a 7:30 a.m. call. My bathroom, the one connected to my bedroom, the one I had been using as a de facto office annex for 2 years. I had a small vanity mirror in there for video calls when the light in my room wasn't working right. I had my things organized the way I needed them organized. She came out at 7:45, wrapped in my towel, and said, "Oh, sorry, the hall bathroom drain is slow." I filed that away. The next week, I found my expensive face wash moved to the back of the shelf, and her collection of 12 products arranged across the counter. I moved them back. She moved them again. I didn't say anything because I am, at my core, a person who avoids small confrontations in the hope that they resolve themselves. They don't resolve themselves. I know this. I keep hoping anyway. The Tuesday my mother stood in my doorway was the Tuesday I had come home to find my cousin on a video call in my room. Not the hall, not the living room. My room, sitting at my desk, using my ring light that I use for work, my laptop pushed to the side. She was doing an Instagram live, in my chair, under my light. She had moved my notes. I stood in the doorway for a moment. She saw me and waved me away like I was a production assistant interrupting a shoot. I went downstairs. My mother was making tea. I said, calmly, "She's in my room using my work equipment." My mother said, "She's rebuilding her confidence. It's good for her to put herself out there." I said, "That's my ring light. I have calls in the morning." My mother said, "You're so rigid, sweetheart. She's family." She's struggling. And that was when my father walked in and said the sentence about the bathroom. Apparently they had talked about it, made a decision. My bathroom was better. More counter space, better light. My cousin was going through something. I was single, I worked from home, I didn't need the same kind of morning routine. The hall bathroom would be fine for me. They presented this not as a request but as a conclusion they had already reached. I said, okay, and I meant it, just not the way they thought I meant it. That night, I opened my laptop and sent an email to 3 apartment complexes I'd bookmarked the previous year when I'd briefly considered moving out for no real reason. One of them had a unit available, a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building 12 minutes from work. It had a dishwasher and an intercom system and a parking spot. The rent was more than I wanted to spend, but it was mine. I scheduled a tour for Wednesday morning. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. Wednesday, I saw the apartment and I signed the application on my phone in the parking lot. Thursday, I got approved. Thursday evening, I drove to Home Depot and bought boxes. I started packing what I could do quietly. Books, files, the equipment from my room that I'd brought in gradually over 2 years, my work monitor, my external hard drive, my ring light. I told no one. My cousin was out with a friend my mother had set her up with. Someone from the church group. A distraction project. My father was watching a game. My mother was on the phone. I moved boxes to my car in 3 trips and nobody noticed, partly because I was careful and partly because I had been background furniture in that house for so long that my movements had stopped registering. The movers came Saturday, early while everyone was still asleep. I'd specifically requested 7 a.m., The crew was quiet and efficient. We were done by 9:30. I left a note on the kitchen table. It said, I found an apartment. I've moved out. I'll be in touch. Love. I didn't write love. But I thought about it. Here's what I didn't tell them I was doing before I left. The internet was under my name. I had set it up 2 years ago because I needed the business tier package for work. Better upload speeds, static IP, all of it. I logged in and submitted a cancellation. Effective the following Monday. The cable package was bundled with internet on my account. Gone with it. The tax filing. I sent my father a link to the IRS free file tool and a 2-sentence explanation. I had done 3 returns for him in the past 2 years, but I wasn't his accountant. He had the documents. He was capable. The prescription management. I texted my mother the pharmacy's phone number and my father's member ID and said he was all set to manage his own refills going forward. It takes 4 minutes. He is a grown adult. The streaming services. I changed the passwords on everything that had been shared across the household. Not deleted. Just mine again. The family group chat. I muted it. Didn't leave, just muted. I wasn't ready for that conversation. I wasn't doing any of this to be cruel. I want to be clear about that, because I know how it sounds. I was doing it because every single one of those things was something I had absorbed into my life gradually, quietly, without anyone asking whether I wanted to take it on. They had just happened, the way a vine grows over a fence, slowly, until one day the fence is just part of the vine. I was detaching the vine. I was giving the fence back. The first call came Sunday evening. My mother. I let it ring. She called again. I picked up on the 3rd call, Sunday night. The internet isn't working, she said. I canceled it, I said. It was on my account. You'll need to set up your own. Silence. What do you mean you canceled it? I mean, I contacted the provider and requested cancellation. It goes through Monday. You should call them tomorrow morning to set up a new account. You'll want to do it early so there's not too much downtime. More silence. Then, Allison. It's fine, Mom. I just can't keep a business account running for a house I don't live in. I had moved and I'd been in my new apartment for exactly 24 hours, and I was standing in my kitchen in my socks, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and I felt not vindicated, exactly. I felt like someone who had just taken off shoes that were slightly too small, a relief so quiet I almost didn't notice it. My mother did not take it quietly. Over the next 2 weeks, I received calls about the following: the internet solved. Eventually, after 3 days, the cable they decided not to rebundle, just got streaming services. which they then realized they didn't have the passwords to, and I reset them. And that was a 30-minute phone call I won't get back. The tax situation. My father called to tell me the IRS website was too complicated, and I told him gently but clearly that I was no longer doing the family taxes, and he hung up. And the pharmacy, my mother called twice about this, as if the concept of calling a pharmacy were an advanced engineering problem. My cousin, to her credit, called once and said nothing about any of the practical things. She just said, "I feel like this is my fault." I said, "It's not your fault." And I meant that. She was 22 and she'd been through something genuinely hard, and she'd landed somewhere that told her the way things were in that house was normal. She hadn't asked for the bathroom. She just accepted it because that's what you do when someone hands you something without explaining the cost. She asked if we could get coffee sometime. I said yes, we haven't yet, but I think we will. The month 2 call was from my father. He called on a Thursday, midday, which he never does. My father communicates in 3 modes: through my mother, through passive comments at dinner, and through silence. A direct midday call meant something had shifted. "The gutters are blocked," he said. "There's water coming in over the garage." I waited. "I don't know who you used before," he said. "The contractor." "I can text you the number," I said. "I don't want the number. I want." He stopped. He cleared his throat. "How much did it cost last time?" $420, I said. I remembered because I paid it without telling anyone and quietly resentful about it for about a week and then let it go. They were very good. Fast. I'd call them before it gets worse. Silence. "Are you planning to come by?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm pretty settled in here," I said. "But I'd love to have you both over for dinner sometime once I get the place set up." He made a sound that was not a yes or a no. He said he'd look at the gutters himself. I did not tell him about his knee. He's a grown adult. He hung up before saying goodbye. We've always been alike in small, unhopeful ways. The conversation I'd been waiting for happened at week 6. My mother asked me to meet her for lunch, not at the house, at a restaurant near her work, which told me she thought about this because my mother doesn't suggest restaurants unless she wants the neutral ground. I got there first. I ordered water and a sandwich, and I sat with my back to the wall, which is a thing I've done since I was a teenager and cannot stop doing. She came in looking tired, not a bad tired, a worked through something tired. She sat down. She ordered a salad she didn't touch. We talked about surface things for 10 minutes, which is our version of warming up. Then she said, "I want to understand why you left without telling us." I said, "I did tell you. I left a note." "That's not the same." "No," I said, "it's not." She looked at me. "We didn't realize how much you were doing." I thought about a lot of things I could say to that. I thought about $420 gutters and Sunday tax prep and pharmacy calls and 2 years of internet bills. I thought about my ring light and my cousin's Instagram story. I said, "I know. She's doing better," my mother said. "She got a part-time job." "That's good," I said. "I'm glad. She's going to stay through the end of the year, and then we'll see." I nodded. My mother looked at her salad. Then she said, the way she says things when she's been practicing them, "I think I've always assumed you were fine, because you always seemed fine." I let that sit for a moment. "I learned to seem fine," I said. "It was the easier option." She didn't say anything. "I'm not angry, Mom. I'm not punishing you. I just needed to live somewhere that felt like mine." I picked up my water glass. "That's not a complicated thing to need." She nodded slowly. She still didn't touch her salad. "Can we do this again?" she asked. "Lunch." "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." We ordered dessert. We talked about her garden, which has been struggling since a late frost took out half her tomatoes. We talked about a book she'd been meaning to read. She asked about my apartment, and I told her about the view from the 4th floor and the way the light comes in around 4 in the afternoon and hits the far wall orange. She said it sounded nice. I said it was. "I want to tell you something that nobody thinks to mention in these kinds of stories, which is that leaving doesn't feel the way you imagine it will." I had imagined relief, and I got that. I had imagined guilt, and I got that too. A low-level hum of it, mostly at night, mostly around the question of whether I had handled things well or just efficiently. I had imagined freedom, and I got that in the particular way you get freedom when you've been somewhere confining, not jubilant freedom, just the quiet, steady kind, the kind that feels like exhaling. What I hadn't imagined was how much work it would be to figure out who I was without the job of managing everyone else. I'd been doing it for so long, the competent one, the one who fixed things, the one who could be leaned on, that I built my whole sense of self around the leaning. When the leaning stopped, I had to figure out what I was holding up on my own. Turns out a lot. I just hadn't noticed because I'd been spending all my energy on everyone else's structure. My apartment is quiet in a way the house never was. I work from my desk, which is positioned so I can see out the window without craning my neck. I have a real desk chair that I bought myself, one of those ergonomic ones that costs more than I wanted to spend, and every time I sit in it for 8 hours and my back doesn't hurt, I think this was a reasonable purchase. I have a grocery list that only has my food on it. I have one streaming password and it is mine. I mow no lawns. I manage no prescriptions. I file one tax return in April and it takes 40 minutes and then it's done. My cousin texted me last week, just, "Hope you're doing well," and a small star emoji, which is her thing, apparently. I texted back, "Doing really well. How's the job?" She said, "It's okay. Getting better." I said, "That's all you need it to be right now." She sent back a heart. My father's gutters got fixed. He found the contractor's number himself, I assume from the receipts I'd left in the household file I kept in the kitchen drawer, which no one had ever touched. The contractor told me, unprompted, when I called about something unrelated. He said my dad had tipped well. I don't know what to do with that information except feel something complicated and fond about it. My mother and I have had lunch 3 times. She brings me things from the garden when it's doing well, a bag of cherry tomatoes last week, dense and warm from sitting in the sun. I put them in a bowl on my counter and ate them over the course of 2 days, and they were perfect. I'm not estranged from my family, I'm just at a different distance from them, and the distance is one I chose, and it turns out a chosen distance is completely different from a forced one. It looks the same from the outside, it feels entirely different from the inside. I had a call last week with a client, a complicated estate case, lots of moving parts, and after we got off the phone, the attorney I work with sent me a message that said, "Great instincts on that, we'd be in trouble without you." I read it once, I said thank you, and then I got up to make coffee. That's the thing about being valued the right way. It doesn't feel like rescue. It doesn't feel like relief. It just feels like Tuesday, unremarkable, steady, sustainable. I think about that dinner sometimes. The one where my mother stood in my doorway and told me my bathroom was needed elsewhere, and I said, okay. I think about the way she braced for impact and then had nowhere to put the energy when the impact didn't come. I hadn't figured it out yet in that moment. I was still working through it. But somewhere between okay and the sound of my own front door closing for the first time with my key in the lock, I understood something I wish someone had told me earlier. The people who assume you will always absorb more. They don't think of themselves as taking. They think of themselves as relying. It feels different from the inside of the taking, and that's the part that makes it so hard to name. You spend years thinking this is just what family does. You adjust, you accommodate, you make it work. And then one day you realize that making it work has been a full-time job that only you are clocked into, and nobody else even knows there's a clock. You don't have to blow anything up. You don't have to make a speech. You don't have to be cruel or cold or cut anyone off forever. You just have to stop absorbing. You just have to let the house hold its own weight for a while. And then you go find a 4th-floor apartment with good afternoon light and a desk chair that doesn't hurt your back, and you make your grocery list, and you have your lunch, and you live a life that is, for the first time in longer than you can remember, specifically and entirely yours. That's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything. I've thought a lot about that Tuesday, my mother standing in my doorway, hands clasped, braced for a fight I didn't give her, and me just saying okay. People assume that when someone finally walks away, there must have been a blow-up, a slammed door, tears, something dramatic to mark the moment. But that's not how it works, at least not in my experience. The moment that changes everything is usually quiet. It's just a word. It's just okay. And then the decision that follows, made in private, in the dark, with nobody watching. What I've come to understand is that the situation I was in didn't happen because my parents were bad people. It happened because I had made it very easy for things to keep going the way they were going. Every bill I paid without mentioning it, every repair I arranged without being asked, every inconvenience I absorbed without complaint, those weren't just acts of generosity. They were also signals. They said, "This is fine." They said, "I can take more." They said, "There is no limit here." And when you send that signal long enough, the people around you stop questioning it. They don't think of themselves as taking, they think of themselves as relying, which feels different from the inside. My mother genuinely believed she was asking something small when she handed over my bathroom. She'd seen me adjust so many times before. Why would this be different? The answer was that it wasn't different. Not to her. It was only different to me, and only because I had finally gotten honest with myself about what the pattern actually cost. That's the thing about intelligence, real intelligence, not just being good at your job or knowing the right answers. Real intelligence is being able to look at your own life with clear eyes and say, "This is what is happening, not what I wish were happening, not what sounds better, not what lets everyone off the hook, what is actually happening." I had been telling myself a story about sacrifice and family loyalty for 2 years, and underneath it was a simpler truth. I had stopped advocating for myself because it was easier not to. That wasn't virtue. That was avoidance wearing virtue's clothes. And the ethics of it, the part I had to sit with the longest, is that by absorbing everything, I had also taken something from the people around me. I had taken the opportunity to figure things out for themselves. My father genuinely didn't know how to reset a password on the mortgage portal, not because he was incapable, but because he'd never had to try. My mother had outsourced her anxiety to me for so long that she'd forgotten she was capable of managing it. When I left, they had to build muscles they hadn't used in years. That was hard for them. It was also necessary. Walking away wasn't the act of someone who had given up. It was the act of someone who had finally decided that her own life deserved the same care and attention she'd been pouring into everyone else's. That's not a radical idea. It shouldn't feel as hard as it does. But for a lot of us, it does feel hard because we've spent so long being useful that we've confused being needed with being valued. Those are not the same thing. My apartment is quiet on Thursday mornings. I sit at my desk in my chair with my coffee and I work, and that's enough. It is genuinely more than enough.